Hey church, and welcome to this week's small group. Now we're getting back into Pulse University. In fact, this series we're going to call it The Beginning of the Church. And the question we asked on Sunday is, how important is the Holy Spirit? And the answer is that without the Holy Spirit, there would be no church. And that doesn't just have to do with the ancient church. That has to do with every single church that exists today. Like, there would be no Pulse of Miami Church if the Holy Spirit was not there. You know, whenever I read about the day of Pentecost and about the first days of the church, I think about Jesus' words in Matthew chapter 28, verses 19 through 20, where Jesus said, "Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I have commanded you." And when you think about what Jesus said in those verses, this is how the first century church put those words into action. And so the question that we should be asking is, how do we put those words into action in our context? So the first question that I want you to wrestle with is, when you read or hear the story of the day of Pentecost, what amazes you the most? And there's a lot to choose from in that story to be amazed about. Speaking in languages that they didn't know before. Peter, who was just a fisherman, who preaches an amazing and a theologically profound sermon. 3,000 people saying yes to Jesus and being baptized that day. Man, the Holy Spirit was busy that day. But you know what? Today we talk about being Spirit-filled. But Christians who talk about being filled with the Holy Spirit today are accused of being anti-intellectual. You know, that they're anti-thinkers, that they just kind of go with the flow, however their emotions lead them. But what I want you to do is read Acts chapter 2, verse 42. Were the first members of the church who were filled with the Holy Spirit anti-intellectuals? Why or why not? And how does a believer today be both Spirit-filled and intellectual at the same time? The first believers were not anti-intellectuals. They studied the teachings of Jesus through the teachings of the disciples. And the good news for you and for me is that we have access to those same teachings today. The disciples are the ones who recorded the Gospels and wrote the book of Acts and all the epistles so that you and I could have access to those very same teachings. You know, as a pastor, I cannot fill you with the Holy Spirit. That's between you and the Holy Spirit. But I can teach you how to read the Bible and encourage you to live it out. You know, verse 42 tells us that the early church was devoted to the fellowship as well. What are the examples in verse 42 of what fellowship looked like for the first days of the church? And which part of the fellowship do you think we are good at today, and what do we need to work on? Next, I want you to read Acts chapter 2, verses 43 through 45. What do you think was the most amazing miracle that happened among the people in the first days? How do you think it felt for the people who gave their possessions to help others? And how did it feel for the ones who were being helped? Personally, I think the most amazing miracle was when the Holy Spirit broke the hearts of the people and their stuff all of a sudden wasn't so important anymore. And they sold their stuff because people were now important. To me, that's a miracle. And you know what? We just witnessed that at the Pulse of Miami Church. We just donated a bunch of stuff to Humbert and Tidy so that they could get a fresh start in life. We just did this. Read Acts chapter 2, verses 46 through 47. And think of the whole story, all of the scriptures that we've read today. List the ways in which the early church worshiped God. And you're going to notice that none of it was singing, and there's nothing wrong with singing, but they worshiped God in other ways. What were the ways that they worshiped God? And how do we know that the early church was devoted to sharing Jesus with others? And is sharing Jesus with others just sharing the story of Jesus? Or is it more than that? You know, I get the feeling when I read these passages that they were worshiping God by just learning together, praying together, and doing life together. That was part of their worship of God. For them, sharing Jesus wasn't just about sharing the story of Jesus alone. It was about the fellowship. And so when they would invite other people to be a part, it wasn't just to be a part of the story of Jesus, it was to be a part of this community. No wonder they added daily to their number those who were being saved. Why do we not see more of the things the early church did in our present day churches? And what could we do as a church to change this? Next, I want you to close in prayer. Ask God to fill us with the Holy Spirit and to help our church to be more like those first days. And remember, without the Holy Spirit, there would be no church. Have a great rest of your small group. We'll see you on Sunday.